Hi, I'm Savannah Miller, and this is the story of how my father threw me out like garbage the moment my grandfather disappeared. He thought I was powerless, a parasite living off scraps. But when Grandpa came back, everything changed. The night it all fell apart smelled like damp earth and pine needles. It was a Tuesday in October. My grandfather had a routine. Every evening, he'd walk the fence line of his small Pennsylvania farm, checking for breaks, talking to the trees he'd planted as a boy. But on that Tuesday, he didn't come back for dinner. His coat was still on the hook. His worn leather boots were gone. The half-finished cup of coffee was cold on the kitchen table. He was just gone. The panic was a cold stone in my stomach. We called the police. Neighbors formed search parties with flashlights, the beams cutting through the dark woods. I stood on the porch, hugging myself against the chill, my eyes straining to see something, anything. My father, Victor, arrived an hour later. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He walked straight past me, his eyes scanning the property, not with worry, but with a look of assessment, like a man sizing up a new purchase. That should have been my first warning. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me, where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing how far the story travels. The search lasted for days, then weeks. Hope started to curdle into a dull, constant ache. And in that vacuum of grief, my father moved in. He didn't search, he seized. He's too old to know what he was doing, Victor announced to anyone who would listen. His mind was going. I have to take control, to protect his legacy. I was only 23, and my world had already cracked open twice. First, when my mom passed away years ago, leaving Grandpa to raise me. And now, with Grandpa gone, the second crack was splitting my life in two. Less than a month after Grandpa vanished, my father called a meeting at the farm. He sat at the head of the big oak dining table where Grandpa and I had eaten thousands of meals. A lawyer I didn't recognize sat beside him. My aunts and uncles were there, their faces a mixture of confusion and pity. Victor cleared his throat, holding up a document. Given the circumstances, he said, his voice dripping with false solemnity, we have to proceed with my father's last known wishes. This is an interim will. It names me the sole executor of the estate until he is officially declared deceased. I felt a wave of nausea. Grandpa would never do that. He trusted me. We were a team. The lawyer droned on about assets and liabilities. I barely heard him. I was watching my father's face. He was enjoying this. The power. The control. When the lawyer finished, my father turned his cold eyes on me. He sneered, a small, ugly twist of his lips. Of course, there's the matter of Savannah. All eyes in the room shifted to me. I felt small, pinned by their stays. He would never leave anything to someone so useless, Victor said, his voice loud and clear in the quiet room. He looked right at me, and with a voice full of venom, he delivered the word that would define the next 5 years of my life. A parasite. The air left my lungs. The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. No one defended me. My family just watched, their silence a weapon of its own. You've been living off him your whole life, he continued, warming to his theme. Your apartment, your car, your education, all funded by an old man you claim to love. Well, the free ride is over. He pointed a thick finger toward the door. Get out. Pack a suitcase. You're done here. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at my aunts, my uncles. They looked down at their hands, at the table, anywhere but at me. In that moment, I wasn't just grieving my missing grandfather. I was grieving my entire family. I walked out of that room with nothing but the echo of his word ringing in my ears. Parasite. He made sure it stuck. My grandfather was more than my guardian. He was my anchor. After my mum died, he was the one who taught me how to change a tire and how to bake her famous apple pie. He'd sit with me for hours while I did my homework, his quiet presence a source of unshakable strength. He taught me that resilience wasn't about being hard, It was about being kind, even when the world was not. He believed in me. My father, Victor, never had. He'd always seen me as a burden, an inconvenient reminder of a wife he barely seemed to miss. With Grandpa gone, he finally had the chance to erase me completely. The day after he threw me out, the real betrayal began. I went to the bank to withdraw some money from the joint account Grandpa had set up for me. The account was frozen. A note from the new executor, my father, blocked all access. I tried to call him, but he didn't answer. Next, I went to my apartment, the one Grandpa had helped me get a lease on. My key wouldn't turn in the lock. A small, white eviction notice was taped to the door, citing non-payment of rent. My father had called the landlord and cancelled the arrangement. All my belongings were inside. My car, a reliable old sedan Grandpa had given me for my 18th birthday, was gone from its parking spot. I found out later that Victor had it towed and sold it for scrap. It wasn't worth much, but it was mine. It was freedom. And he took it. The worst part was the lies. He systematically dismantled my reputation with the family. I'd call my aunt, and she'd be hesitant, her voice strained. Victor told us you were making demands. Savannah, that you were unstable. I'd try to explain, but the seeds of doubt were already planted. He painted me as a greedy, ungrateful girl who was trying to steal from a confused old man. He made them believe I was the villain, and they chose the easiest story. They chose him. At 23 years old, I was utterly alone. I had one suitcase of clothes and $100 in my pocket. My first night of homelessness was spent on the couch of a college friend. I remember lying there in the dark, listening to the hum of her refrigerator and replaying his voice in my head. Asterisk Parasite. Useless. Asterisk. I cried until my eyes were swollen shut, not just for my missing grandpa, but for the family that had discarded me so easily. I was grieving the loss of everything I had ever known. The first few years were a blur of exhaustion and humiliation. I got a job at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, working double shifts to save up for a security deposit on a room somewhere, anywhere. I served coffee to truckers at 3 a.m. and cleaned grease traps until my hands were raw. My pride was a stubborn, bitter thing. I would rather starve than call my father and beg. The isolation was the hardest part. Family events became things I only saw on social media. My cousin's wedding photos popped up on my feed. Everyone was there, smiling, celebrating. I wasn't invited. Then came Christmas, birthdays, summer barbecues. Each event was a fresh sting, a reminder that my family had a hole where I used to be, and they had all agreed not to notice it. One year, on what would have been Grandpa's birthday, I couldn't stand it anymore. I drove my friend's borrowed car to my aunt's house, where I knew they were all gathered. I just wanted to see them. I just wanted to feel like I still belonged. I walked up to the front door and knocked. My father answered. The warm sounds of laughter from inside died the moment he saw me. His face hardened into a mask of disgust. "What do you want?" he asked, blocking the doorway with his body. I just wanted to come," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It's Grandpa's birthday." He looked at me, up and down, taking in my cheap coat and tired eyes. "Parasites don't belong at the table," he said, his voice low and cold so only I could hear. He shut the door in my face. I stood there on the porch for a full minute, frozen. The humiliation was so intense it felt like a physical blow. I could hear the party starting up again inside. I walked back to the car, my whole body shaking, and swallowed the shame. But as I drove away, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, a deep, gaping wound. But beside it, a tiny, hard seed of determination began to grow. He would not break me. I would not let his word be the final word on who I was. Quietly, without anyone watching, I started to build my own life from the rubble. The next 5 years were silent. Not peaceful, but silent. The ache of my grandfather's absence never truly went away. It was a low hum beneath the surface of my new life. But I learned to live with it. I worked. I saved every penny from the diner. I moved from my friend's couch to a tiny room I rented in a boarding house. The wallpaper was peeling and the floorboards creaked, but it was mine. I found a flyer at the local library for a scholarship program for students pursuing careers in public service. I thought of my grandpa, of his kindness and his sense of duty. On a whim, I applied. I wrote my essay about him, about the lessons he taught me, about resilience. To my shock, I won a partial scholarship to the state university. So I went back to school. I studied social work. I spent my days in class and my nights waiting tables. It was a grueling schedule. There were times I was so tired I'd fall asleep on the bus, my textbook open on my lap. But every time I thought about giving up, I'd pull the worn photograph from my wallet. It was a picture of Grandpa and me at the county fair, both of us grinning, a giant stuffed bear sitting between us. His smile gave me strength. I graduated with honors. I got a job at a nonprofit organization, helping families in crisis. I rented a small, clean house with a little patch of grass out back. I was proud of it. I was proud of myself. I was no longer that broken girl on her friend's couch. I was a survivor, but the bitterness lingered. I still didn't know what had happened to him. Was he alive? Had he suffered? The not knowing was a special kind of torture. Meanwhile, news of my father would trickle back to me through town gossip. Victor was living like a king on the farm. He'd sold off acres of the backwoods to developers. He bought a new truck, took lavish vacations. He'd walk around town, boasting about his inheritance and how he was finally making the farm profitable. He was living a lie built on my grandpa's disappearance, and everyone believed it. 5 years. 5 years of silence. 5 years of building a life he had tried to destroy. I thought that was how the story would end. I was wrong. It was a crisp autumn evening, almost exactly 5 years to the day he disappeared. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, paying bills, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number from a restricted line. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello. There was a moment of static, then a voice. A weak, raspy voice, but one I would know anywhere. Savannah? It's me, Grandpa. The world stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Grandpa. I finally choked out, tears instantly flooding my eyes. Is it really you? It's me, kiddo, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm okay. He was alive. The words echoed in my head, a miracle I'd stopped daring to hope for. He explained everything in a rush. That night 5 years ago, he'd had a stroke while walking the fence line. A neighbor found him and called an ambulance. At the hospital, my father had shown up. Victor told the doctors that Grandpa had no other family, that he was his sole guardian. He'd had Grandpa transferred to a remote, long-term care facility for veterans hundreds of miles away, a place with strict rules and limited contact with the outside world. He told them Grandpa was confused, that he suffered from dementia. My father had kept him hidden. He forged signatures, filed fraudulent papers, and used a fabricated power of attorney to seize control of everything. He had told Grandpa that I wanted nothing to do with him, that I'd moved away and never looked back. He had isolated us from each other, feeding us both a steady diet of lies. He told me you hated me, Grandpa whispered, his voice cracking, but I never believed him. Not for a second. A nurse at the facility had finally become suspicious and helped him contact a patient advocate. It had taken months, but they had finally untangled the web of deceit. Can you meet me, Savannah? He asked. They are bringing me home. Meet me at the farm. Tears streamed down my face as I got into my car. The drive was a blur. When I pulled up the long gravel driveway, I saw him. He was standing on the porch, leaning on a cane. He was thinner, grayer, and his face was etched with lines of hardship. But it was him. I ran from the car and threw my arms around him. I held onto him, my anchor, my home, sobbing into his shoulder. After 5 long, silent years, my grandpa was back. In the quiet of the farmhouse kitchen, Grandpa laid everything out on the table. He had never signed an interim will. He had never named Victor his executor. His original will, drafted years ago, was still in a safe deposit box at the local bank. "And you know what it says, don't you, Savannah?" he said, his tired eyes looking into mine. I nodded slowly. I knew. We had talked about it once, years ago. He was leaving the farm, everything, to me. He wanted me to be its caretaker, to preserve the land he loved. Victor's entire empire was built on fraud. He had manipulated the courts, forged my grandfather's signature, and lied to everyone. The anger that rose in me was cold and clear. It wasn't a hot, blinding rage. It was a focused, powerful certainty. "We need to call a lawyer," I said, my voice steady. Grandpa nodded. "I already did." We met with the attorney the next day. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who listened to our story with a grim expression. She confirmed our worst fears and our greatest hopes. The evidence was overwhelming. The forged documents, the illegal transfer of assets, the medical records. It was all there. We had him. "We can go to the police right now," the attorney said. "Press charges immediately." I looked at Grandpa. He looked at me. I thought about the years of humiliation, the name he had branded me with, the door slammed in my face. A public arrest felt too easy, too quick. It wasn't enough. "No," I said slowly. "Not yet. I want poetic justice. I don't want my revenge to be born from anger. I want it to be delivered by the truth." Grandpa smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time since his return. "That's my girl," he said. So, we prepared. We gathered the documents. We waited. We let Victor believe he was safe. We let him plan his own downfall. The invitation arrived a week later. It was a fancy, cream-colored card. Victor was hosting a grand family dinner at the farm to celebrate, finalizing the estate. He was boasting to the whole town that ownership of the Miller farm was now, officially and irrevocably, his. It was the perfect stage. The night of the dinner, I drove Grandpa to the farm and we parked down the road, out of sight. I felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't a frightened girl anymore. I was a woman who knew her own worth, a worth that had nothing to do with my family's approval. We waited until we knew everyone would be there. Then, we walked up the driveway. Through the big dining room window, I could see them all. My father, standing at the head of the table, a glass of champagne in his hand, his face flushed with arrogance. My aunts, uncles, and cousins, all listening, all smiling. They were toasting to his success, to my erasure. Mid-toast, just as Victor raised his glass high, Grandpa pushed open the front door. He walked in, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the hardwood floor. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Laughter died in throats. Forks clattered onto plates. My cousin dropped a wine glass, and it shattered on the floor, the red liquid spreading like blood. Victor's face drained of all color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. His jaw hung open, the champagne glass slipping from his fingers and crashing onto the table. Grandpa walked slowly to the head of the table and stood opposite his son. His voice, though frail, filled the dead silence of the room. "This farm," he said firmly, his gaze unwavering. "This house, this land, it was never yours to steal." Right on cue, Grandpa's attorney stepped into the room, a leather briefcase in her hand. She walked to the table and placed it down with a solid thud. The family stayed, their faces a canvas of shock and confusion. "Victor Miller," the attorney said, her voice crisp and professional, "for 5 years, you have acted as the executor of this estate based on fraudulent documents." She opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick file. She laid a document on the table. "This is the forged power of attorney you submitted to the Veterans Facility." She laid down another. "These are the forged signatures on the financial transfers." With each new paper, another layer of my father's lies was peeled away in front of the family that had enabled him. He stammered, his eyes wide with panic. This is ridiculous. He's not well. He doesn't know what he's saying. Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying, Grandpa cut in. The attorney then produced the final document, Grandpa's original, notarized will, signed and dated years before he ever got sick. She read the key passage aloud, the one that left the entire estate, without condition, to his granddaughter, Savannah Miller. The silence was deafening. I had stayed quiet, sitting beside my grandfather, letting the truth do the work. Now, I stood up. I looked directly at my father, the man who had called me useless, who had thrown me away. And then I looked around at every single family member who had watched him do it. Finally, I spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and steady. 5 years, I said. For 5 years, you called me a parasite. But the truth always outlives the lies. The relatives sat stunned. Their gazes shifted from me, to my father, to my grandfather. They had chosen a side 5 years ago, and they were just now realizing they had chosen the wrong one. My father stumbled for excuses, his words tripping over each other, but it was useless. The truth was on the table for everyone to see. The fallout was swift. Victor was removed as executor immediately, and the county sheriff, who had been waiting discreetly outside, came in to inform him that he was under investigation for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. He was escorted from the house he thought was his grand dinner party turning into the scene of his public humiliation. As I inherited the farm, my grandfather and I began the slow work of restoring what Victor had neglected and sold off. We planted new trees where he had cleared them. We repaired the fences he had let fall into disrepair. We were a team again. I didn't gloat. I didn't send a single "I told you so" message. Revenge had never been the point. Justice was. A week later, my aunt called, her voice full of fake sympathy and regret. Others followed, offering flimsy apologies, trying to rewrite history. I listened patiently to each one. When they were done, I said the same thing to all of them. I turned to the family still gathered in shock in that dining room, and my words were for them, too. You abandoned me when he was gone, I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. You chose to believe the liar because it was easier. I don't hate you, but I choose peace, and I'm choosing it for him, I said, looking at my grandpa, not for you. The silence in that room was louder than any shouting match could ever be. It was the sound of bridges burning, not with fire and rage, but with the cold, quiet finality of truth. They had made their choice 5 years ago. Now, I was making mine. They called me a parasite, but Grandpa always knew I was more. He knew I was a seed, waiting for the right time to grow. Sometimes, the quiet years of struggle are what give you the deepest roots. And sometimes, those roots are strong enough to break through concrete. The years they underestimated me were the very years I was becoming unbreakable. Time will always reveal who you really are.